This episode is brought to you by Anytime Fitness. We may talk a whole lot about sports, but when it comes to keeping fit ourselves, there's definitely room for improvement. I hit this point early July. I was just like, I am not in good enough shape. I started trying to walk at least 15,000 steps a day or hiking or just anything to keep my legs moving. Now it's the end of 2023. I feel great. I had a physical 3 weeks ago, and the guy was like, "You're doing great. You're doing better than you were 3 years ago." I felt great. Whatever your goals are, progress is possible thanks to Anytime Fitness. Get a personalized plan and support from an expert coach anytime, anywhere. Visit anytimefitness.com to try Anytime Fitness for free. Start to train for your life. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. See website for details. This episode is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian software like Jira, Confluence, and Trello help power global collaboration for all teams so they can accomplish everything that's impossible alone. Because individually we're great, but together we're so much better. Learn how to unleash the potential of your team at Atlassian.com. Atlassian.com. Atlassian. Tap the banner or visit this episode's page to learn more.
Welcome to Through the Ringer. I am still your host, Tate Frazier, and we got a jam-packed show today. We got the Ringer's very own Mallory Rubin, who's going to come on and do a little bit of prop culture. We're going to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy. We might even talk about the Orioles and Lamar Jackson. That'll be a lot of fun. We also have TNT's very own Kenny the Jet Smith. He's going to come on and talk about the playoffs and talk about his new book, Talk of Champions. We got some great stories there. Again, like I said, this is a jam-packed show Through the Ringer. We got some big, heavy-hitting guests. Let's get into it now. All right, now joining us is the voice of reason on Inside the NBA. His new book, Talk of Champions, Stories of the People Who Made Me, came out on Tuesday, May 9th. He's a two-time NBA champion, a three-time Emmy-nominated host, but most importantly, he is a North Carolina Tar Heel. Kenny Smith, thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Go Heels. What's up, brother?
It's great to see you, and we're going to talk about the book because I finished it yesterday. A lot of great stories in there. Obviously, a lot of legends that have been a part of your life, but we'll get into those stories. But first, I want to talk about the 2023 playoffs a little bit. I know you're obviously covering that in depth on Inside the NBA right now. I wanted to ask you this because I think it's a little bit shocking. What's the most shocking, though? Is it the Warriors? Is it the Celtics? Or is it the Milwaukee Bucks who are already out of the playoffs? We'll start there. Of those three teams, they were considered the favorites going in, and right now they're not looking like it.
I would say the most shocking is the Miami Heat. Their ability to play so well this late in the season. They caught fire at the right time, kind of like an NCAA tournament.
Right.
Typically, that doesn't happen in the NBA. You are what you are after 82 games. We kind of know your weaknesses and your strengths. You can't disguise them or hide them. But they've been able to kind of reinvent themselves in the last, 45 days to arguably saying if they got to the NBA Finals, no one would be surprised.
Right. And everyone's kind of buying into the Jimmy Buckets hype, right? We're all back on Jimmy Butler. And I think Jimmy, to me, kind of bridges the gap, right? We always see the conversations about old school, new school, the old generation players talking about the new generation of players. How much do you kind of dive into that conversation? How much is that conversation something that you guys have, on set with each other about the differences between the two generations? And how much are you enjoying a guy like Jimmy Butler, who is kind of more of an old school player, so to speak?
Well, I just enjoy the game, so I don't really put it into the perspective of that. Honestly, for me, it's about the performance in the moment. I think that's what we talk about. Can you be big in a big moment? A lot of guys could be big in a 20-point blowout,
right.
but when you're down 3 and it's 40 seconds to go, and Jimmy Buckets is talking trash, wait a minute, you're down 3 with 40 seconds, and he delivers. Being big in big moments is probably more important than anything else.
Yeah, and talking about your book, you talk about the champions that are in your life, and those guys talk big and a lot of big moments. And in the book, it opens up. The first chapter is about Michael Jordan, obviously a North Carolina legend, someone that you played with, someone that ended up giving you your tour on campus when you came down to Chapel Hill. Him and Buzz Peterson. I thought that was a great story in the book. But I found it fascinating. The first line in the book was, "I'm jealous of Scottie Pippen," and I wanted to set that up for you. Why are you jealous of Scottie Pippen, and where did that story come from?
Well, Scottie Pippen was the 5th pick in the draft. I was the 6th pick. And then eventually Chicago traded for him and moved up. I always knew, like, the one thing about being, I think, successful or good at anything is not only knowing your strengths is knowing your weaknesses. And I know that when I'm around someone with the personality traits that Michael had that I knew of in college, that it propelled me to play better. So I knew that Scottie Pippen, when his first couple of years, when he was getting headaches and when he wasn't thought of as I don't even know if Scottie Pippen made first team all rookie team our rookie year. But I also knew that he was going to be able to be around the greatness of Jordan that would propel him to new heights. And I'm a New Yorker. I like people to get in my face and talk to, propel me. And like, I'm cool with all of that. And it just, I was jealous that Scottie was getting it. And I was like, man, this dude is getting all of the good stuff, man. He's going to be a better player. And here we are. He's a top 75, top 50 player all time. And, I do tribute a lot of that and some of that to Mike playing with Michael Jordan and his personality and his demeanor to help bring out the best in people in the way that I always found receptive.
Yeah, you mentioned that bravado, and I thought one of the cool anecdotes in the book, you talked about you guys were scrimmaging against some of the NBA guys that came back in the summer, Mitch Kupchak, Al Wood, and Jordan had said to the group, "Class is in session," and you as a New Yorker, you said you enjoyed that kind of mantra from him. What was it like witnessing him back when he was just a college guy? And then obviously you took a lot from him being a freshman right on campus and learning from him firsthand.
Well, I think the one thing, when you're 17, 18, 19, there's also a vulnerability that you speak with. You're talking about things that you aspire to be, not that you already become. So got to hear, like, how he would quantify how he would reach his goals. And that in itself, and you see it manifest, gives you the courage to do it yourself. And that's what the book is about. I wanted people to, like, I always see, I read, I'm not sure if you do, I read a lot of self-help books,
Right.
But it's usually from one person's perspective on how they got there. This is 15 chapters of successful people on how I observe how they got there and how I implemented things over the years that I wish I had at 1 year in my life. Like if I had all of these qualities in 1 year. And so that's what I try to give you, so you can feel better about yourself and go, oh, Magic Johnson does that. That's why when that did that work. Michael Jordan, I get it. Bill Russell. And then you apply it to your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of those guys, you called him the most honorable man you've ever met. His name is Akeem Olajuwon. You obviously won 2 NBA championships alongside him. What was something that, Akeem, obviously you got to go read the book if you haven't. There's some great stories in there. But what did you learn being with Akeem, at that level and kind of being his right-hand man as his point guard?
Well, I think the one thing that, you said it, he's the most honorable person I know. Like we have, you get that. You ever play that game when people like, if you're stranded on a highway, who the first 3 people you'll call?
Right.
Like, I'm going to call Akeem, even if I haven't talked to him in years, because he has a quality that sounds so simple, but it's so hard to achieve. He says what he's going to do, and he does what he's going to say. And so that's a hard quality to keep, because being that honorable in that moment and vouching for your word is very difficult. So as a basketball player, he does it, but even more, like you said, I'm gonna be there when that guy drives. But as a person, when he does that, it teaches you quality that you could teach your kids. You're like, no, like I told my son, I'm gonna be there and pick him up. I'll be there. Like I'm gonna be there. He could count. Like that's the one thing that I feel like successful people, out of the many things that are in the book, They know that they have someone that's so dependable, they feel a comfort to fail.
I love that. And, talking about those Rockets teams, there's always a conversation, the what ifs that happen in basketball, right? We have all these sliding door moments of what if this happened, what if that happened. One of my favorites that gets brought up, and I can see that it always affects the Bulls guys. Like I know BJ Armstrong, whenever I bring this up, he gets a little bit, kind of sits up in his chair a little bit. But people talk about what would happen if the Bulls had played your Rockets teams, right? With Mad Max and Clyde and Big Shot Bob. And you're rubbing your hands together right now, but if we were to have this hypothetical, Kenny, what would you expect to see in this series with the Rockets, Akeem Olajuwon at the peak of his powers going up against Michael Jordan at the peak of his powers? What would happen?
Oh, we'd win.
We
like Michael Jordan was no disrespect. First of all, I'm gonna quantify it. That means he would have won 8 championships. That's in a row. That's pretty impressive. I don't. In our modern era, we still haven't seen that. The other thing is, like we saw the documentary, like there was dissension within those years. That's why it stopped. So Horace Grant was not there.
Right, on the Magic.
So now he's on the Magic. And no one was saying that, Michael Jordan was rusty when he was getting 55 points on the Knicks. So he was there those years that we won. One of those years we won. They lost to Orlando Magic and we swept them. But the reason they lost to Magic wasn't because Michael didn't have greatness. They were just too small. So they had no one who could stop Shaq. And then they had Horace Grant beating the boards down, where they put this guy on their shoulders afterwards when they won, because they were just too little. So there was no Horace Grant. That team we would have beat. The next year there was no, the year after there was no Dennis Rodman. Now, if you told me the Dennis Rodman teams when they won 3 and the Horace Grant, I mean, like, oh, maybe who? I don't know. I don't know about Rockets. But those teams with no Rodman, no Grant, our team was better. Like, not that Michael wasn't the best player on the planet still, but we've seen the best player on the planet at times not have the best team.
Yeah, and, obviously Bill Cartwright was a part of the first three-peat that they had, and Bill Cartwright wasn't at the same level, so that would have been the guy that you would throw.
No.
Yeah, right.
No. He's not at that stage of Bill's career.
Right.
Is he ready to run up and down from baseline to baseline with Akeem Olajuwon?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, this is getting into your broadcasting career. Obviously, Inside the NBA is the gold standard. We all talk about how great of a show it is. One of the stories that I heard was kind of fascinating. You and Charles were talking about this, but when Shaq first came on the show, is it true that he was practicing his DJing, outside during games at times, and you and Charles were kind of having fun, poking fun with him early on? Can you give me some of that background? Because I actually saw DJ Diesel one time in Las Vegas, and it was a great show. Hilarious, but it made me think of you guys on Inside the NBA.
Oh, yeah. Shaq is a great DJ, honestly. But he was practicing his DJ skills during games. And he had the music is blasting, all of the scratching. It's impossible to pay attention to what's going on at that moment. So, he's such a knowledgeable person. The guy who wins championships, he understands the game. So he could glance at the game and really get some really astute points at times. But on one particular night, he's not really watching, he's doing more DJing. And he comes out and he says, let's say, oh, well, Kenny is not having a good game. And Charles kicks me and I kick him. And we go, what are you talking about? Kenny's not even playing today. So the player that he was talking about wasn't even playing. Mm-hmm. He was just going off basis off the history of what he knows and knowledge. And we just rode him. And from that point on, he had to take a backseat of deliberation on how he was going to approach this job, because most people wouldn't have called him out on it. And if they did, they would have only called him out on it for like that moment. It was the recurring theme all night. So we would we would bring it, let's say the Knicks game is on tonight, we would be like, oh man, I wonder if Patrick Ewing's going to have a good game. Like Patrick Ewing, he's like, he retired 20 years ago. So we would we kept it going all night. And so you cannot get away with not paying attention on our show.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you consider that kind of the secret sauce of the show? Because, I mean, you guys obviously are poking fun at each other all the time. Ernie does a great job kind of controlling the chaos. But is that the secret sauce that you guys kind of have with each other? You have the ability to poke fun at each other, right? And it's no harm, no foul.
It's the ability to listen. And, most shows that I've been on even when I come on now, they go, you get 15 seconds, this guy's going to get 15, he's going to get 15. We're like, why? Why 15? Then if someone has that 15 and they're saying, we all take notes in our head or write them down. But if Charles says something that's either great or outlandish, I'm ripping up my notes. Like, no, I'm listening to you, bro. And I'm going to either double down on what you say or call you out on it. And I think that's what we do, I think, different than any other show. We don't care if we don't get our point out if we're not listening to the other.
One last question. I thought this was a great chapter in the book. It obviously was about someone near and dear to your heart. It was Coach Dean Smith. You talked about that recruitment to North Carolina. Obviously, there's a pipeline from New York to North Carolina dating back to Frank McGuire. But in general, what was it like to have someone, you compared him to Gandhi in the book. You said he is at that level, MLK. What was it like to have someone like Coach Smith in your life, and how special was that relationship still to you to this day?
It was an out-of-body experience because every day was a life lesson. It was like, you know how you get that moment? Like, it was like
aura.
That every day. It was every day you had an aha moment speaking to him. Even if we had on our practice plan, so you'd have, we're going to do defensive drill number 1, defensive drill number 3. We're going to do this. We had a defensive emphasis of the day, like make sure you help baseline, offensive, no turnovers in the backcourt. But then we have a thought of the day. And the thought of the day, you had to remember all 3. Thought of the day might be like, never judge a man unless you walked in his moccasins for at least 2 moons. I still remember those things like they were yesterday, because those thoughts of the day, that energy allowed you to understand others and have empathy for others in times when you might not have sympathy. You have to understand why they are the way they are. And not just only the way you are and getting to your destination. We before big games, man, like Coach Smith would come in, we're playing North Carolina State, that school in Durham, who I'm talking about. We could be playing any of them. And he'd come in and, NBC, CBS, ABC, whatever we're on. And he'd come in and go, there's billions of people in China who could care less about this game. Okay, let's go. All right, let's go. And that would be the pregame speech. And you would get a calmness about it, how like basketball, as much as important as we think it is in this moment, it really isn't. But at the same time, have fun, work hard, play smart, and play together. That was a speech. Work hard, play smart, and play together. And we walk out.
Yeah, it's as simple as that. TNT will present extensive second round and exclusive Eastern Conference Finals live game coverage. He is the great Kenny the Jet Smith. The book is Talk of Champions. If you haven't, go check it out right now. Some great stories in there. Kenny, thanks so much for coming on the show. Thanks so much for talking about the book. And again, it was a great read. Really appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
All right, joining us now on Through the Ringer, she is the person that brought me into this universe a long, long time ago. She is now the host of the House of R. She is the head of editorial. She does everything here. Her name, of course, is Mallory Rubin. And Mallory, I'm excited because we get to talk about pop culture, a.k.a. on this show, prop culture. But thanks for coming on the show.
Tate, I don't want to be too dramatic or too hyperbolic right at the jump here, but it's one of the joys of my life.
Yes.
To be here with you today.
Oh, wow.
It feels like yesterday that you were joining us as an intern. Feels like yesterday that you were collecting some of these posters.
I think I moved all of these posters once upon a time. I think that's why they're all behind me. Yeah.
I know, and it's fitting for our Guardians chat today because that's very much about the future but also the past and how these things inform each other. So what a fitting time to be here with my pal. As Rocket says, it's good to have friends, as Lila says, beautiful, man.
I will say this.
Who will cry first today?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, the movie, if you haven't seen Guardians of the Galaxy yet, you're probably going to tear up. And you and I sitting here, we're going to tear up as well because, we're playing on nostalgia. You're pulling on the heartstrings. For all the people that are watching right now, I saw this movie yesterday in theaters, and about 45 to an hour in, I turn around to the people behind me. They're bawling, crying.
Yeah.
And before we get into the nuance of, all the conversations about Marvel, Phase 5, all that sort of stuff, I got to ask you, how many times did you cry while watching this movie because people were bawling all around me?
If you had asked in advance here on this show, would have been odds off the board. Mm-hmm. It was bound to hit heavy. You could tell just from the trailer.
Pound the over.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Seeing, like, the sweet little baby rocket face in the trailer. You knew the needle drops in the trailer, just the amount of time we had waited. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we got the holiday special. We'd seen the Guardians characters in Infinity War and Endgame. But the amount of time we'd waited between volumes 2 and 3 to return to the Guardians franchise proper, and the fact that this was the James Gunn swan song, not only with this franchise and these characters, but in the MCU, right?
And he's got his son in the movie, right? There's all this familial connections going on.
His brother is just learning how to work Yondu's old arrow. It's about the heart, Tate. I'm not sure if you've heard, but I lost count of the number of times I cried. And I saw it the first time at a screening, and then I saw it again, pod prep, and just the sheer pleasure of it. And I thought maybe I would be like more composed the second time around. Not so, Tate. I cried at all of the same scenes and also in anticipation of all of the scenes that I knew were going to make me sob. I was basically like a puddle by the end. It was just incredibly moving and beautiful and really meaningful.
And you're not alone. I mean, like I said, everyone was moved by this movie, and it felt like, the Guardians were so important to the larger Marvel cinematic universe that we had gotten away from their actual films themselves, right? And then when we came back, it just felt like you were hanging out with your friends again. I saw the first movie quite a while ago. I caught up on the second movie before going to see the third movie, and I was still moved when I saw this film. And my big takeaway, obviously in the first two films, Peter Quill, Chris Pratt, he is the star of the film. We all know that. But after you watch the third installment of the franchise, you kind of start to look around and say, wait a second, is Rocket really the star? Is he the quote-unquote secret protagonist? Shout out to Daniel Chin, wrote a great piece about that. But is he the secret protagonist of this whole story?
Well, there's a scene in the movie that basically says exactly that, right? Mm-hmm. This has been your story all along. Now, this is not necessarily a show about existential dread and or religious beliefs, so I'll leave it to each individual person to interpret that sequence as they see fit. Is that Rocket talking to himself? Is he seeing Lila and Teefs and Floor in another plane?
What a name, by the way, Floor.
Oh, it's wonderful. The sequence where they name themselves is just beautiful. I mean, a name, identity, it's just a really wonderful stretch. But Rocket, and James Gunn has spoken in a really interesting way in the press circuit around this film and just in general about like how deeply connected to Rocket he feels, and like there's a level of that where you could say like this character is literally named Rocket Raccoon. What do we mean here? But I think that's one of the things that's beautiful about it and why this movie and the franchise in general has resonated so fully with people, because like this was definitely Rocket's film, right? We got the origin story. You could look back and say it's been Rocket's story all along or not. I think ultimately one of the great things about it is the answer doesn't really matter. If you have connected deeply in a way you never thought possible to Nebula, let's say, that's valid. If Star-Lord was always your guy and he still is after this, fine. If you have found yourself more fervently committed to Drax and Mantis as a duo, talk about a painful parting at the end, right? Then that is also completely there in the text. And like, this is ultimately a found family story, right? And it's about a group of characters who always felt like outcasts. If you think back to Volume 1 and the like MCU Pantheon scene where Quill makes his big, I look around and what do I see? Losers. I mean, folks who've lost stuff, right? And then Rocket builds to the joke about like, here we are, standing around in a circle, bunch of assholes. This is a group of characters who started out as foils and deeply selfishly motivated people and then found common cause and purpose, not only to help other people, but crucially to help each other, and found the best versions of themselves and the acceptance of themselves in each other. So, like, I think Rocket in this film unlocked that so fully because, like, we learn about his deeply painful and devastating history. And come to realize, you think back to Volume 1, that agonizing fight with Drax, like, I didn't ask to get made. Well, what did that making look like? And what's the message? Like, no one else gets to make you. You make yourself. And Rocket figured that out through the second found family. And then they all help figure it out for each other, too. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and it feels like in this film, right, at a certain point, Gamora and, Star-Lord kind of became Ross and Rachel, right, in this group where it's like they're just like the lovers and we're caring about them. But then when we enter this movie, because of the MCU, right, we know Gamora has lost her memory for the past 3 years.
Different Gamora.
Right.
So this is the 2004. If anyone is confused about this.
Because there was a lot of people that I felt like were confused by this.
Not worth trying to explain. I honestly loved the elevator sequence where Quill does the quick, like, if you missed Infinity War and Endgame recap, and Nebula's like, I mean, like, you left out some stuff, but that's basically the gist of it. The Gamora who comes back in an Endgame from the alt timeline, the earlier timeline.
We saw Thanos, we saw that whole situation, right? This is a different Gamora.
It's a previous version of Gamora, so she has not gone on to join the Guardians. Now she's living her best Ravager life, which I also thought was amazing because Quill makes his, like, impassioned pitch. This is the thing that we shared. This is what we meant to each other. And they end up in a better spot at the end of the movie than they were at the beginning, certainly. But I thought that scene where she said, in essence, it's not on me to fix whatever is broken inside of you.
Right.
Like, I think you could say, well, that seems maybe contrary to the overall message. But it's actually, I think, very much of a piece because you have to, it's like a pulley system, right? How do the people that you surround yourself with help you figure out who you want to be? It's the Mantis Drax, like, speech to Quill about how, like, life is a pond and he needs to learn to swim, not just move from lily pad to lily pad, but you've got to be able to get there on your own too. And that's the Quill Gamora journey. Like, they are not in this version of their lives meant to be together in that way, and, like, that's okay, and that's affirming too, that they can each go make the choice that's right for them.
Yeah, and I will say, if you watched the first movie, you probably thought, oh, guys in space, flying around, playing, like, soundtracks of the 80s.
Yeah, awesome.
We get it, right? How awesome is this? Yeah. And then if you watch this movie, the soundtrack is amazing still, but you're sobbing while these great songs are playing. I mean, just a quick tangent on that. Did you feel like it lost a little bit of its luster with the soundtrack because of the emotional capacity of the film a little bit? I felt sometimes it was like, this is what we're supposed to be doing, right? We're playing the hits, but also, why am I crying?
It's a good question. I'm curious how you would rank the three soundtracks. I think that ultimately the distinction is that Volume 1 and Volume 2, so Awesome Mix 1 and Awesome Mix 2, are literally these cassette tapes that Meredith Quill, Peter's mom, who died when he was young, gifted him. And so they're not only like these banger playlists for us as consumers and this really fun, like, extra auteur touch that James Gunn gets to put on the movies. For Peter, they're this tether to Earth, right?
Yes.
To his Terran backstory, to his family, to his original family. And Awesome Mix Volume 3 is the Zune that Yondu Kraglin found for him and gave him, and that Peter received after Yondu died in Volume 2. So it's just a different thing because it wasn't, like, curated by his mom for him as she wrote him a note calling him Star-Lord, the moniker that he then assumed for the rest of his life. Still, Awesome Mix Volume 3 rules, man. It's a delight. It's a different vibe and a different energy when Rocket scrolled down to the 2000s at the very end and played some Florence and the Machine, and everybody in Nowhere danced. And Drax, who famously said there are two types of people, those who dance and those who don't. And those who don't, he got into it, man.
He finally did it.
Let himself wiggle a little bit. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Tate, anyone can become a dancer if they want.
Anyone can dance as long as you're feeling the music. Also, we got, I think I Am Groot, right, is said however many times. And then finally Groot says something other than I Am Groot for the first time. Yes.
What did you think about that?
I thought it was sweet, but I almost thought it, kind of took away from the whole idea that, eventually you learn what he's saying.
But that's what's happened.
Right.
You, Tate Frazier, are sitting there
we all learned
last night in the theater watching these children sobbing around you, and now
You're adults, by the way.
Their emotional okay, yeah, I saw adults, children, people of all ages crying. Again, I wept freely and openly multiple times, working through all of that, and we're like, wow. Gamora, one of the running bits in the movie is that this version of Gamora doesn't understand what Groot is saying, thinks everybody is like pulling one over on her, trying to make her feel like not a part of something.
She says at one point, I know who you are.
What you mean. And then they have the moment at the end, right? She's like, yeah, it was great to work with you too. And then we're all Gamora at the end. We just wanted to resist the pull. We wanted to complain about the flight mechanics on the Bowie. But no, Tate, we spoke Groot as well. I have to say, honestly, I think like it seems like mileage may vary on the response to us understanding Groot, but like it signaled almost more than all of the characters parting and going their own ways that this version of Guardians had concluded. This was like the end of a chapter.
Right. And that's where we get to the prop, version of this. This is prop culture. Yeah. So we have an over-under, which is the line is at 0.5. So if it will happen, if it won't happen, will there be more Guardians of the Galaxy films? Because, spoiler alert, at the end of this movie, Rocket sort of takes charge. This is his team. He is still going to be the leader he's going to now be the leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy while everyone else is making their own path. Do we think, Mallory Rubin, there's a world in which Rocket, a.k.a. Bradley Cooper, is now the leader of the new version, the new chapter of the Guardians of the Galaxy?
You should have said, spoiler alert, 15 minutes ago before we talked about every single thing that happened in the movie.
Maybe we just put that at the top, like at the bottom. Spoiler alert. If you haven't seen the film, apologies.
0.5. So I'm of two minds on this. Yes, Rocket takes over as captain. This like, who's really the captain? Who's the better pilot? Conflict between Rocket and Quill in the first few installments builds to this conclusion. It's lovely. He's with a whole new crew, right? Adam Warlock has joined the new Guardians. Cosmo, the dog, is in the new Guardians, etc. We get that's the first stinger. The second stinger gives us the actual tag that the legendary Star-Lord will return. Joanna and I got we heard from a listener, and Joanna shared this on our House of R deep dive on this film. Check it out if you haven't yet.
Yeah, go listen to that.
This week, speculating that the fact that they included the legendary in front of Star-Lord to like call to a specific comic arc maybe signaled a different version of the character entering the MCU through the multiverse, rather than just Chris Pratt returning. And then that got me thinking more broadly whether that could be how the characters are deployed. Like, the of two minds thing is, on the one hand, I think that the James Gunn Guardian franchise is maybe as specific, right? And like as distinct and singularly connected to the writer, director, creators sensibility as anything in the MCU to date. And so the idea of a standalone Guardians movie from someone other than James Gunn, who, like, just to be clear, will not be making another MCU movie because he's now running their main competitor. He's taking over DC, right? And he's starting with the Superman Legacy film. I would be a little bit surprised, especially because of how well received this franchise has been and how associated it is with his like ethos and his fingerprints. Here's the flip side. This is the MCU. Like, this is one of the great unceasing machines
and
in
if
the
you have
history
IP,
of pop culture.
yeah, you collect on the IP.
Yeah, and I don't think, like, with a lot of respect to James Gunn's creative achievements of the Guardians franchise, I don't think that the people who are running Marvel are, like, ultimately going to not deploy Groot or Rocket Raccoon elsewhere in the MCU because James Gunn did a good job with the thing. And, of course, we've seen these characters in other installments already, right? Like we mentioned Infinity War and Endgame. So I think we will definitely see the characters in the MCU. I think it'll be a while before we see a standalone Guardians film, though. Like, why risk what is really, like, in the current MCU landscape, kind of increasingly rare and precious consensus that a thing was good? I just don't think you want to jeopardize that, at least for a while.
And do we think now as we move into Phase 5 of the MCU, right? Yeah. I mean, how much are these characters like a Rocket? Do we need them to maybe check in a Spider-Man movie? Or I saw the Marvels is coming out this fall. Maybe they pop up and say, hey, we're still around. Like, how much of the cachet, right, that they have do we have to still collect on a little bit to make sure that people say, I need to still go to the Marvel movies. I still need to see how the universe unfolds.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. You know, the character set is so vast at this point, and I think that, like, I love the MCU. I spend a lot of my time consuming the MCU, thinking about the MCU, and then potting about the MCU. So I'm always down for the deftly examined and explored connections across the different franchises. I think it's fun when a character from one corner of the universe pops up in another. And I think certainly in the multiverse, the first three phases where the Infinity Saga right now we're in, the multiverse saga for phases 4, 5, and 6, that's definitionally like a cosmic saga. Will we have more grounded stories? Have we had more grounded stories? Yes. But just like a lot of it's going to be in space. A lot of it's going to be about multiverse. A lot of it's going to be about timelines. So the Guardians are logical candidates to recur in that. I think there are a lot of questions in general about who we see and when right now in the MCU, and a lot of what's next on the horizon is on the TV front, and then that connects. And I'm excited about a lot of the impending TV shows, the Disney Plus shows, but there's also been this like discussion, a pretty open one in the press, right, about let's slow down. Let's slow down on these Disney Plus shows. We can't be putting out more content in a year than people can possibly consume. And
then you have to do the thing like we talked about where, Peter Quill's in the elevator and he's like, let me get you up to speed real quick in case you missed it, right? Wait, how many in case you missed it can we do in the Marvel Universe?
Yeah. I mean, at a certain point, you either need to expect that people have consumed every single second of it, or that they just simply don't have to, and there need to be like entry points and on-ramps for people, which like ultimately is very true to form for the comic book storytelling tradition, right? Like, how many people alive have read every single issue of every comic book that might connect to their favorite characters? It's an impossibility, and that's one of the great joys of comic book fandom. You can kind of like pick any point to start and reset. It's hard in the middle of a saga in the MCU to say like we're going to reset. And much of Phase 4 was about mantle passing.
Right.
We have moved beyond.
Goodbye, Iron Man. We move on to Spider-Man. Right.
Mourning. Just a lot of talk about the blip and what life was going to be like after the blip. Now it's time for the next stage. And that means more time with characters like Sam Wilson, who we've been with for a while, right, in the Infinity Saga, then in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and now we've got like a new Captain America, New World Order movie coming up as part of Phase 5. And it also means like stories that are new to the MCU entirely. Like we're going to get a Blade movie as part of Phase 5, etc. So I think it'll be an interesting mix. How present Rocket will be, I have no idea. I'm very actively waiting for the new Rocket merch. I love merch, Tate. You know this?
I love merch.
I intend to
look around us. We got garb everywhere.
We will have. You hear this promise right now from us. We will have a Rocket Raccoon plush in here at some point, and then Bill will come in and he'll think it's an actual raccoon. He doesn't know who Rocket
what
Raccoon
is this?
Yeah. So that'll be fun for us.
All right, last question before I'm going to ask you a couple, sports questions because we're here. Why not? But last question about movies and in general, right? As we look at trilogies, right? A lot of conversation because of how great this movie was received. People were saying, "Is it the greatest trilogy ever?" Now, I think that is a bridge too far for someone like me.
Inside of the MCU or literally ever in the history of cinema?
They're talking in the history of cinema, right? You follow all these movie posts. And
Tate, who's they?
They are the haters, the people out there. I don't know who they are. I don't know, but I like the pejorative they. You know what I mean? They're saying this out there. Is it one of the greatest trilogies ever?
Was it Kyle before the recording started?
Kyle hasn't seen it yet, right? I think he's got earplugs in.
But he feels confident that this is the greatest trilogy in the history of pop culture.
Well, we got Lord of the Rings, right? We got the before trilogies, right, with Linklater. I mean,
those would literally have been my two picks. Tate!
Right? Those are the top two. So maybe conversation ended, right? I mean, it's a great superhero trilogy, but it's not on the pantheon, right? It's not up there.
Yeah. I mean, and that's rarefied air.
Of course.
What I do feel more confident saying is that, for me at least personally, this is comfortably in my top 3 inside of the MCU of standalone franchises.
Nice.
So, that doesn't count like the Avengers films, right? But I've got like the Cap franchise still number 1. I think I have Guardians number 2 overall, just passing by the MCU Spidey films, which I think are exceptionally good. So that's a pretty good place to be. Where do you have Guardians inside of the MCU?
I think it's number 2. I think that's a good spot to keep it. I enjoyed it. Like I said, I was moved by it. I always felt like the Guardians was almost like, to catch your breath and have a little bit of fun while all this chaos is happening, right? That was what it was meant for. But then this last one, you know what I mean? I'm like, all of a sudden, I didn't know I cared this much about, the analogies that were being used, right? I didn't know that Rocket was so important to me.
Sound like Drax right now.
Yeah, I know. So that'd be
Just exploring the power of an analogy.
How about Drax when he got pushed back on his analogies? He was kind of the comedic star of the film because we missed Rocket for like the first half while he was battling back, but Drax did all he could to keep us going. So shout out to him.
Amazing stuff.
Did amazing stuff. Great comedic timing. All right, there you have it for another edition of Through the Ringer. We just went through the ringer with Mallory Rubin and Kenny the Jet Smith. That was a whole lot of fun. We will see you back here in the same exact place in Los Angeles on Tuesday. See you then.